Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here, for being connected in this live. We are very excited of finally be presenting Hive Minds, a tool to think together about our planet. Today, some to the challenge we are still facing regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, the unacceptable war on Ukraine has awakened a deeper state of alarm of all of us. As Don Haraway says, it's the moment to think, to imagine, to weave life forms in a wounded world. And it is amid this global crisis context that Hive Minds was born. After 2 years of work, we can finally present this methodology of collective intelligence. My name is Lina Ruiz. I am part of Ceps Proyectos Sociais, Trànsit Proyectos, Planta Uno, and I have been part of Hive Minds team since inception, in its ideation, conceptualization, production, and implementation. We are streaming from Planta Uno, a cultural research center, a wonderful place for different encounters and to prototype different projects. We are in L'Hospitalet de Llobregat in Barcelona, Spain. And today I will be presented this methodology of collective thinking together with Friso. Hi, Friso. He's in the Netherlands. Friso is a project maker, connector, moderator. He's also member of Expodium, a urban think tank to publish, teach, and curate and speak about art and the city. And educated as a historian, he is now the communication manager of the European Cultural Foundation, and he has done the follow-up of the grant awarded by the Cultural Solidarity Fund, thanks to which we have been able to produce Hive Minds. And I am also here at my side with Jordi Baltà. Hi, Jordi. He works on consultancy, research, project management in cultural policy. He's a cultural manager, and he works also in international cultural relation in Trànsit projects. And he's also an expert in Agenda 21 Culture, an important document that states the role of culture in relation to the sustainable development. The agenda for today will be that I will first give the word to Friso. Friso will be talking about Europe, culture, and solidarity. Then I will give the word to Jordi, who will be explaining the Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations and the role of culture within this framework and the climate emergence. Then I will show a video of Hive Minds and present a bit of its ideation and how it looks like and how you can use it. Then we will wrap all this presentation and ask a few questions, exchange some ideas, and invite you all to play Hive Minds. So to begin, I will give the word to Friso, as I said. So Friso, thank you again for being here with us. All on you. You can start your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Lina, for these welcoming words. Hello, everybody. Indeed, not physically present in Barcelona, and that has good reasons. I think the climate crisis has invited all of us to actually not be traveling too much now that we can do a lot via Zoom or other tricks on this thing called the internet. So indeed, I'll have prepared a short presentation with a few slides, so you don't need to be looking at my face all the time. I was told I have almost 20 minutes to take you on a little journey on what my employer, the European Cultural Foundation, is aiming for and how our work relates to Europe and how solidarity, not only with fellow Europeans, but also with future Europeans, plays a role in our work. So I can only say, let's go. One of the questions that we like starting many conversations with is, do you feel European? And if you feel European, do you feel European on top of a local identity? Or do you feel European in place of a national identity? Or do you feel yourself adhering to a local identity and perhaps you are feeling European on top of it? It's an important question because, of course, there are many things that we can never ever solve at the local level anymore. If we're talking about the climate crisis, we might perhaps be trying to fence off some of the consequences at local level. But if we're looking for tackling the real causes of climate crisis, we can only do so in an international way. We think the same counts for culture on a European level. We all have local cultures that we are very happy with, that we feel familiar with, that we often like sharing. And in order to preserve and perhaps even extend these local cultures, we think it is very good that there would be a European culture, perhaps a European culture fed by a European sentiment. And that is a word that I do not pick at random because it is one of the words that is actually in the motto of the European Cultural Foundation. We promote a European sentiment through culture by developing and supporting initiatives that let us share, experience, and imagine Europe. There's a long history to the European Cultural Foundation. As you can read along, it was founded in Geneva in 1954 with figures among the founders, Swiss philosopher Denis de Rougemont, the architect of the European Community, Robert Schuman, famous for forging the European Community of Coal and Steel in a few years prior, and His Royal Highness Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, under whose presidency the foundation moved to Amsterdam in 1960. These, let's say, cigar-smoking white men all passionately believed in culture as a vital ingredient for Europe's post-war rebuilding and healing. And there's a very famous saying that one of the other founding fathers of the European Union, Jean Monnet, has said that if he were to redo the building of the European Union all again, he would have been starting with culture, because culture for us is that one space where we all negotiate what it means to live together on this continent, what it means perhaps to live together on this planet. And it is one of those spaces where we confront ourselves with our assumptions and where we might be inquiring and be curious for the positions of others. So it's a very broad definition of culture that is far away from, let's say, the professional production of art. Culture for us is really that broad environment which defines how we deal with one another. So, looking back at those founding words, ECF was created for the stimulation of the European sentiment, to promote the development and preservation of a feeling of mutual comprehension and democratic solidarity between the peoples of Europe by encouraging cultural and educational activities of common interest. These are beautiful statements that you can find in many of the founding papers of foundations like ours. It is, of course, much more interesting to see how we actually work when we are talking about such big words. You know what? I'll just skip this slide. But I think one sentence that is also the bold sentence here is very important. The sense of common destiny among Europeans. And I think, especially now, being confronted with the climate crisis, or, well, I think you are also doom scrolling a lot about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. How does these external events help awake a sense of common destiny for Europeans? We've seen a lot of reaction from the European Union. We've seen wonderful reactions by many European citizens. And is there this sense of common destiny now? We don't know. But we know that we are working towards this, and we do so in various ways. As a foundation, and it might also be good to say how we finance our work. In the Netherlands, there's a law that the lotteries need to give their profits to non-profits. So we are actually subsidized by those people in the Netherlands that buy tickets in the lottery system. Thank you, lottery ticket buyers. Um, and of course, we also try to obtain money from Brussels projects, European Commission tenders. So back to our work programs. We have three domains that actually cover almost all that we do in our programmatic work. We like people and communities to experience Europe, to imagine Europe, and to share Europe. When we speak about experiencing Europe, you might think about the Erasmus program that I guess many of you know. The European Culture Foundation was one of the co-inventors of the Erasmus program, but more apt perhaps for now, because of course we're not running the Erasmus program anymore, is that we're connecting residencies with traveling artists, or we're connecting cultural managers that like working together on a certain program for a year with small funding. In our belief, the more people experience what it means to be living in another European country, in short, what it means to be European, the merrier. Sharing Europe is very much about what is our shared space in Europe, what is our shared public space, to be more precise. And with public space, we don't only mean those, let's say, community centers or those theater halls where people might be having discussions on what it is to be European, but also our digital realm. When we're all dependent on Silicon Valley tech, will it ever be possible to have a digital European media sphere? We doubt. So we are also very much contributing to the development of a European digital space. Imagine Europe, as you might imagine, is much more about how we think that our continent could or perhaps even should be. One of the programs that is very prominent in our Imagine Europe program is called the European Pavilion. Have you ever wondered why, for example, at the biggest art exhibition in Venice, there's only national pavilions and not a single European pavilion? Well, the European Pavilion is founded exactly because of this, because we would like to overcome these national pavilions and start thinking collectively on what our continent should be, hence European Pavilion. These programs are run by program managers and, of course, with a lot of international partners. But we do not only have our own programs, we also learn a lot from our programs that we then take into advocacy. Advocacy is, of course, a beautiful word for policy influencing. And advocacy is a means to advance our mission and to achieve our programmatic goals. We do this advocacy work at a European level. So that means talking to people in Brussels, but we also do this in national capitals, of course. There's a few domains that are very important for us. One is the Cultural Deal campaign. Cultural Deal campaign is all about streamlining culture across all policy fields of the European Union, and also trying to, well, one might even say, seduce national governments to spend more money on culture. And I'll skip the second button and get to the third one, philanthropy, because when you are a foundation as ours and you give money away, you also have thoughts about how philanthropy can be organized. And it's very striking that there are not a lot of European foundations that really see Europe as one area and scope of work. So we'd like to change this and actually invite other foundations to be working on the European level much more, because we think it helps, here we go again, create that European sentiment. Cultural Deal campaign was something that we actually started just when Corona was starting. We saw how the cultural and creative sectors in Europe were suffering a lot. Lots of people lost their job. Let's say the humus layer of these upcoming makers had to be looking for opportunities elsewhere in a lot of places. And we also knew that in those first months of pandemic times, everybody was looking at cultural means to just find a little bit of solace. Movies, recorded theater pieces, music. So you can imagine how actually important culture is for our mental well-being. And still, it wasn't part of any of the plans for the recovery of Europe. So we said, together with campaign partners Culture Action Europe and Europa Nostra, if Europe is to recover from pandemic times, we need to have culture feature way higher among the priorities of the European Commission. Um, Another thing that we do, and I touched on this already as a foundation, we give away money. And often we did so in connection to our programmatic goals. But when the pandemic actually decapitated a lot of, well, cultural makers, cultural sectors, cultural scenes across Europe, we thought that maybe it is good to just step over our own programmatic ambitions and then open up a fund for funding those people that needed funding in order to continue making culture, not only to make culture, but to enable us to keep on meeting each other, to keep on thinking about what makes us European and how actually are we positioned in the world, and what is it that we could make altogether for our continent to be a more inclusive, more democratic, more bottom-top decision-made continent. So we launched a Cultural Solidarity Fund, put a lot of our financial resources into this, and, excuse me, invited other philanthropic institutions to join us. So Cultural Solidarity Fund was launched in April 2020, very rapidly after the outbreak of Corona in Europe. And until now, we have had 5 rounds in our Cultural Solidarity Fund. The first 2 ones were open calls, where really we received so much applications from a lot of people all across Europe. And for us, I think it's important to stress Europe is way bigger than the European Union. We received a lot of applications, and then we thought perhaps it is good to actually also bring about a little bit more focus. So together with 2 Italian foundations, Fondazione CRT and Fondazione CRC, we looked at how we could actually support cultural makers in that very hard hit region in the north of Italy around Bergamo. Um, that was a 3rd round. A 4th round was much more looking at, I touched on this, European digital spaces, where there's a lot of disinformation going on, not only about geopolitical circumstances, but as you all recall, also about the virus. In a lot of circumstances, these two got together, and our Tech Valley friends perhaps were not so willing to intervene. So this was an extra stimulus for us to keep thinking about how could we also help advance a European public space based on European privacy norms, and where the data will be owned by the users, not by the providers of platforms. So this was a 4th round. And then we have a 5th round that was looking into those areas, let's say we might call former Eastern Europe, former Eastern Germany, where a lot of the problems that we are facing in Europe, um, a degrowth of population, a lessering or lowering of services by government, perhaps caused by these votes for some parties that you would not like to see receive too many votes because they're all about excluding others rather than about including others. So how can cultural makers also perhaps help us turn tides in fighting extreme right politic stances? At the bottom, you'll see that we had some 100 projects funded, and we're very happy that 90 of them took place and take place at the current moment with international partners. Needless to say that Play Hive Minds is one of the grantees. So it's nice to bring a circle come together like this. In the recent light of the invasion of Putin's army into Ukraine, we opened up a 6th round of the Cultural Solidarity Fund, our Ukraine edition. We have now been working and actually trying to help people with emergency cultural actions, really trying to archive materials that would be objects of war, trying to help those that needed to find residencies, trying to get emergency aid on a humanitarian basis to people that had to flee their home cities. Um, and I think it's good to stress that our Ukraine edition of the Cultural Solidarity Fund is not only benefiting Ukrainians, but is helping all of those that are opposing the war and are supporting Ukrainians. So all this boils down to that one big question: do you feel European? Then what does it mean? Does it mean to stand next to one another when the other one is brutally invaded? Does it mean to stand next to another one if there's a pandemic and you might not be in the same room, you might not even be in the same country, but still, how could we have been a little bit more solidary with the Italians in Bergamo? And how could we have been a little bit more solidary with refugees living in camps across the borders in Belarus? Or so these are all these questions on what does it mean to be solidary and what can you do as a foundation? We think what we are doing is what we can contribute. Perhaps we could do a lot more because there's more things. We're touching on the climate crisis. So yes, philanthropic organizations are signing pledges on philanthropy for climate. How can we all contribute to making Europe a green continent, to help us switch to green energy? And this is not only talking about what others need to be doing, but it's also very much about what we can do ourselves, right? How can we put, as examples, our website on a server that is not run by a company that is using wrong energy resources to run the servers? Can we perhaps green our building by putting solar panels? Can we stop traveling for launches and events exactly like this one? So these are small steps that we ourselves are trying to bring about. And furthermore, we very much, I think I'm going to repeat myself, believe in the power of culture to confront us with our own assumptions and make us question what it is that keeps us going during the day. So we believe very much in the power of cultural actors to bring about more, well, knowledge about the emergency that we are facing in this climate crisis. Um, and then I've been talking a lot about Europe, and for sure, we know that we're not living in an isolated continent, and that a lot of the consequences of Europe acts in the rest of the world perhaps have consequences for our own continent too. So, in the future European Cultural Foundation, Europe is a continent that has a few very beautiful things. Um, we have individual freedoms, we have prosperity for big parts of populations. So there's always work to do to include others in this, right? And not have excluding mechanisms in place, whether that will be for people already residents in Europe or people still coming to Europe. And another way of thinking about Europe as a continent is trying to see it in a broader context of, well, the other continents, right? If we're talking about the climate crisis is global, and then how could actually forces of art be those spaces that are fighting off excluding forces? So together with two other foundations, by coincidence also based in the Netherlands, HIVEMINDS and Prins Claus Fonds, we were among the kickstarters for this great project that perhaps Jordi might be talking about, Forces of Art, and the subtitle Perspectives from a Changing World, where we actually learned a lot from how cultural actors in various countries across the world are doing their work in order to make their surroundings a more inclusive, more democratic, more bottom-top decided place. And it's that we learn from other continents in trying to adjust that to our own work in order to try realizing the same in Europe. And I think with this, I always get to the end because there's this one day in the year when we all celebrate Europe, and that is Europe Day, May 9th. So working in the communications department, I cannot resist putting in this little slide saying May 9th, we'll be streaming a full day program on the website, europeday.eu. We'd like seeing you there. And thank you. Lina, back to you again. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Friso, for your presentation and for telling us how the European Cultural Foundation works and about the amazing work you enhance with the Cultural Solidarity Fund and all the programs you have. Now I will give the word to Jordi. He will continue enriching this conversation about culture through the explanation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you, Jordi, again. You can start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Lina, and thanks and hi everyone who's following us. It's really a pleasure to be with you all today and to be able to attend the launch of Hive Minds, which has been quite some time in the making and which has gathered a lot of the imagination and creativity and ideas from many people, and we're very pleased to be able to present it. As Lina was saying, I will be reflecting today on the importance of cultural aspects for sustainability, and particularly focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals. But I'd like first to refer to some of the things that Friso was referring to in his presentation, because I think, for instance, the sense of common destiny that has been furthered by organizations like the European Cultural Foundation over several decades is a good example of some of the things that are at stake today, and how that sense of common destiny, which is valid at the European level but also at the global level, is somehow reawakened and accelerated at times of crisis, such as when we face major wars as well as the climate emergency. And as Friso was also exemplifying in the projects he's presented, there is a power of culture to help foster a sense of solidarity in that context, and somehow move from that feeling of common destiny to more tangible expressions of collaboration. And I would like to focus in particular on the notion of sustainability and how sustainability and approaches to sustainability can also be accelerated through different cultural factors. I would first like to refer and explain why cultural aspects are important in terms of thinking about sustainability. And that is somehow often implicit, and we don't always are aware of that, because very often our thinking of sustainability focuses more on the technical aspects, on environmental aspects, on economic dimensions, and so on. Considered to be cultural in a deep sense. Secondly, it is also through cultural aspects, how we communicate with one another, how we relate to one another, how we express ourselves, that we can make sense of the world we inhabit and find our place at moments of difficulty and doubt. So there is again a connection between cultural aspects and ways of living sustainably. One of the components of culture, creativity, can be a way in which we can imagine solutions for the future, and solutions that help us address the challenge our lives. And I think initiatives such as that Friso was mentioning, the Force of Art project, that somehow gathered lots of learning and experiences from how through art different communities around the world were facing the challenges and imagining better ways of living together, is a good example of that. At the same time, we can consider that taking part in cultural life is something that makes us more human, and that connects with the understanding that the right to take part in cultural life is a basic component of human rights and human dignity. So again, the ways in which we can imagine sustainable lives have to do also with integrating a way of living or a way of taking part in cultural life. And finally, we also know that through participation in cultural life, in cultural activities, through involvement in cultural organizations, etc., there are a number of indirect effects that can emerge: better social cohesion, empowerment of people, contribution to the generation of employment, and other aspects that are also part of a holistic understanding of sustainability. More precisely, in Transit Projectors, we've recently completed a report for the Provincial Council in Barcelona that addressed the connections between culture and the climate emergency or the climate crisis, and how this could be strengthened, or how that nexus of culture and the climate emergency could be strengthened through local policies and local programs. And I'd like to focus in that in particular, because to us it exemplifies, it illustrates 5 tangible ways in which the climate emergency can be tackled at the local level through cultural action. One of the areas that we examined was the potential of developing integrated approaches to the landscape and to territories in which elements of traditional knowledge and intangible heritage are integrated with the natural ecosystems. And through that, there is a balanced way of living around our landscapes, around our environments, that is accelerated and is strengthened through cultural knowledge. Secondly, there is the potential for creative explorations done by artists and cultural communities and collectives through exploration and research of the combinations between human practices, natural ecosystems, and the climate emergency, and how we can, through creativity, develop and explore more sustainable ways of living around our local environments. A third area that we explored is a set of participatory and educational projects that integrate culture and science, and which try to also together find more creative ways of living in our contexts. And things like the citizen science projects launched by libraries or launched by museums dealing with natural history or dealing with science are good examples of that. A fourth area of work concerns how cultural organizations and cultural activities can also reduce their carbon footprint or their carbon emissions. And that is by using more sustainable materials, by reducing mobility, and by somehow integrating principles of the circular economy in the ways they are operating. And there's been a lot of efforts being done in the last few years by cultural organizations in many countries, and there's of course much more that can be done still in this respect. And the final area that we examined concerns more the policy level of how local authorities, as well as definitely regional and national authorities and other levels of governance, can adopt more integrated approaches in which cultural aspects are integrated in their own environmental sustainability strategies, in fostering social economy models, dealing differently with public space in a way that integrates cultural knowledge and cultural practices, and so on, and developing more holistic and integrated approaches to living sustainably. So that's something we've recently done, and which I think is quite illustrative of the things we are dealing with today. And that leads us to the global framework and the Sustainable Development Goals. And the image we are now showing might be familiar to many of you because it has gained visibility in the last few years. The Sustainable Development Goals, as you might know, are the agenda that the United Nations adopted in 2015, and which is, say, the guidebook or the roadmap, the roadmap between 2015 and 2030 at the global level in order to achieve sustainable development. This is for the first time an agenda that understands that sustainability is a shared goal at the global level. This is not something that applies only to the global south or to the countries that we sometimes refer to as developing countries, but actually in every society in the world. As we know, there is a lot to improve in terms of uh, caring more about the environment, fostering gender equality, inclusion for everyone, a more inclusive and sustainable economic development, and so on and so forth. So this is a really global agenda that applies to all societies in the world, and which also applies not only to governments but also to all actors in their own respect, because everyone can, at their own scale, somehow contribute to better and more sustainable progress in this area. Um, as you can observe, the Sustainable Development Goals include 17 thematic goals, and it is to our regret that there is not one that focuses specifically on culture. This is something that several cultural organizations and the networks campaigned for before 2015, with the aim to get one dedicated goal for culture, just as there is one for education, health, gender equality, and so on. This was not achieved, and this remains a challenge and a goal in the long term for when new similar agendas are adopted. But at the same time, what was achieved was that a number of more or less explicit references to cultural aspects were integrated at different points in the Sustainable Development Goals. And we can see them here on the screen. So for instance, in the goal that deals with education, there is a reference to the need for education to promote an appreciation of cultural diversity and of how culture contributes to sustainable development. In goal number 8, that deals with inclusive and sustainable economic development, there is a reference on the importance of creativity and innovation to be encouraged, and that of course gives a space for artistic development as well as for initiatives within the cultural industries to be part of approaches to inclusive economic development. There are also a couple of references to the importance of fostering sustainable tourism that integrates local cultures and local products, as well as a dedicated commitment to the need to preserve cultural and natural heritage in what is one of the most explicit references to cultural aspects within the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, when there is a reference to the importance of universal access to information, that can be understood to include the role of libraries as places which provide access to information and to culture. In addition to these explicit references, we know that culture matters much more in order to achieve sustainability in general, and also to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals as they are understood. And that's why, in addition to the explicit references that I mentioned in the previous slide, there's a number of other ways in which culture matters for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. One of them is the fact that as we know, we have a global agenda, but for that global agenda to be successful, you need to adapt it to the particularities that exist in each community, in each society. So there needs to be a process of localization of that global agenda, and that is necessarily a cultural localization, because, say, the achievement of educational goals or health objectives need to be adapted to the specific ways of life, to the specific languages, to the specific aspirations and habits of different communities. So that needs to be adapted to each cultural context. Secondly, we also know that cultural aspects, including traditional knowledge and forms of life, can be enablers of sustainable development in many ways. So for instance, the management of natural resources, whether it's the management of seas or rivers or forests or mountains or urban and natural environments, has a lot to do with the traditions and the ways of knowledge that have been gained over the decades. So there is an element of cultural knowledge and traditional knowledge sometimes in the hands of indigenous peoples or of rural communities and other groups, that is necessary in order to foster a more balanced and sustainable way of dealing with natural ecosystems. Similarly, when we deal with the importance of fostering inclusive participation and empowering vulnerable communities, there is a lot that can be achieved through cultural participation and through spaces in which vulnerable groups can express themselves, develop their creativity, and work together in co-creation processes. And finally, in another example of this work or role of culture as an enabler, there is, for instance, employment that can be generated in cultural sectors. And the third area in which cultural aspects also matter implicitly for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals concerns those elements which are phrased in a very generic way in the Sustainable Development Goals, and which can be understood to also integrate cultural aspects. So, for instance, when in the first Sustainable Development Goal there is a reference to the need for everyone to have access to basic services, in many communities in the world, we can assume that those basic services include cultural services, or when there is a reference to the need for accessible and inclusive infrastructures, those infrastructures should also include cultural facilities and cultural spaces. So again, there is quite a lot in which, through culture, we can contribute to fostering sustainability and to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think, just to finish, that through initiatives such as Hive Minds, we can somehow mobilize all of this knowledge, all of this creativity, in order to, through the prism of the Sustainable Development Goals, imagine together new ways of living more sustainably and imagine a better present and a better future and a more sustainable one. So I think now it's time to give back the floor and to explore and get to know Hive Minds, which is a very exciting prospect. So thank you very much, and let's go and discover Hive Minds.
Crisis that has forced us all to think of different ways to collectively inhabit a wanted world, Hive Minds was born. Hive Minds is a playable methodology that promotes listening, dialogue, and consensus between diverse people. It is a platform that proposes to design strategies in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations 2030 Agenda. And it is a collective intelligence laboratory that, through 170 global trends and a speculative glossary, invite us to build hives that help us imagine more sustainable futures. Do you want to participate? As of March 2022, go to www.playhiveminds.com and build your hive digitally or analogically. Or write to hola.playhiveminds.com for more information. Okay, thank you very much for the video presentation. Thank you again, Friso and Jordi, for your intervention. They were like a great introduction to finally tell you a bit more about Hive Minds. You have already seen the video. I just want to start with a reminder that Hive Minds result from a collective work fed by the entire team of Ceps, Trànsit, Planta Uno, ITD, the marvelous work of the design-focused development studios of Mucho and Jos that are located in Barcelona, thanks to the support of the European Cultural Foundation and the Cultural Solidarity Fund, and thanks to many people that has been part of this project in different stages, to all the people behind the camera, the leadership of Tomas and Mario, Edu, Jose, Sylvia, and everyone who has been part of this project, because it is thanks to all of them that today Hive Minds has the shape of an open and free planetarian methodology. That being said, I just want to tell you a bit about how was the process of ideation of HIVEMINDS, because everything started on January 2020. We were thinking about what Jordi just mentioned, how as cultural managers and cultural mediators, we could work in a dynamic that could enhance this common destiny. How can we work together in a way where we could think of better ways of living sustainably in this planet? And then we found an image. It was this global trends map of 2017 2015 by Richard Watson that resembled like a metro line and has a lot of different ideas about globalization, the growth of Africa and Asia, the robotization of work, and so on, with different categories related to like technology, society, or food. And it was how are we living today, but to what are we directed to? And it was a bit of science fiction. There were like ideas about an alien invasion and also a pandemic. In that time, that was something that we never thought was like it was out of the focus. But then we start working on all of these ideas. We start to systematize all this information. We create a great Excel that we edit, cure, and debug. And it was very interesting because we found that the cultural perspective was missing. We were talking about mega trends, something things that were related to the way the planet was working and what heading towards to, but the cultural perspective was missing. So we start first working on culture, putting it at the center and understanding what culture means and why is it important. So we took all that Jordi has just mentioned about the importance of culture and we start building ideas of culture that could be transversal to all these categories that we have found. And then the pandemic started. So it was like very tumultuous. It was lots of things happening there. But thankfully, even though it was a very difficult moment, we start reflecting on things that were affecting us very deeply. So we start thinking about the ecosystemic relation and to speculate about how is that these ideas about economics also touch in politics, society, health, and of course, culture as a transversal thing. So we had like this center, putting culture at the center, and we have this sum of different ideas, like 200 different concepts and ideas. Uh, we then decided that we wanted to design a dynamic that could be like a game, a playful methodology, because we do think that playing is not just achieving certain goals, but playing allow us to put ourselves and anticipate to different scenarios, to think about future-oriented solutions and to be creative, supportive, and innovative. So we put the culture at the center and then we decide to design a playful methodology. What came next is that we were thinking about this common destiny um, under the lens of global trends. But then we found that these global trends were intimately related with the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals. And then we thought that this Agenda 2030 should be the main guideline of our dynamic, because then we could think about future-oriented solution, about a more pragmatical insight, and we were very caring about how is that not only governments, as Jordi just said, but common people from their daily practice, from their collectives or organization, they can have incidents and transform positively the world to live better. So we put the culture at the center, then we design a playful methodology. We decide to frame it in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. What happened next is that at the beginning, we were thinking about deploying this great playground of hive minds that indeed you can see here in Planta Uno, and that you are all welcome to come here and play. But then we also realized that we needed to be more inclusive. We needed all the people to be able to work with this methodology. And then we decided to design not only an analog methodology or play that you can see here, but also a digital platform that can be used worldwide. And we are really proud because we have been able to do it. So what is next is that I will show you what's the shape of Hive Minds and how you can navigate through the website. So this is our beautiful webpage of Mentes Colmena or Hive Minds. As you can see here, it is now available both in Spanish and English. And we really hope that we are able to translate it into other European and non-European languages, because we really believe it has a local, regional, and international extent, and we hope to reach different groups of diverse people from different backgrounds and geographical locations. So here you will find the home of the webpage, where you will find the 17 SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals. You can find a bit more about what Hive Mind is, as we were telling you in the video. And then a bit of inspiration of the architecture of Hive Minds and why is that it is related with this, with the bees and the ecosystem of bees, the beehive, and this amazing architecture made of hexagons. And then we have here how to play. You will find that there are two formats, the ones that I have just told you, analog and digital. The elements of the game are the 17 SDG hexagons that can be used with the 170 ideas, concepts, and provocations. And there is also a speculative glossary. As we have explained in the video, the main objective of Hive Minds is to manage, to work collectively towards a common goal. And for this, it's really important just to listen, dialogue, to justify your opinions, and of course, to reach an agreement with your partners and share what you have built together. So there is this how to build a hive. A hive is a map of ideas resulting from the union or two or more hexagons. So the more hexagons are related to each other, the more diverse and rich the dynamic will be. You can, as I have said, you can play in analog way. So for this, you can just enter to the download section. You will have to fill with your information, and you will receive an email with a PDF where you will find this document. So this document has all the cards, the hexagonal cards that you can just print, cut, and then use as you please. And if there is you need a concept or an idea that you cannot find here, just feel free and write it. There is no limit for this dynamic. It can be expanded as you wish. Then is the glossary. In the glossary, you will find an explanation for every one of the 170 concepts that are divided into SDGs or into categories such as culture, economy, and education. And then you can play online. So you will find this platform, you will find the SDGs and the categories, and I will just show you very briefly how can you use the dynamic. For example, for us, as it has been stated here with the European Cultural Foundation, it is very important to have partnership for being able to accomplish our goals. So I will put this SDG as the center of my hive. And I have created this, where are they? Oh, there. Okay. So I can just think about how to get, being able to create partnership for the goals. Maybe just like having these sustainable cities and communities SDG also on my mind. And then I can navigate through different categories, and there you will find like different ideas such as how to create partnership maybe through cultural and social mediation. And at the same time, this cultural and social mediation is the one that will make me able to create more sustainable cities and communities. And the same thing for the culture for inclusion, for example. So you can continue building your hive. There are no general rules for this. In the how to play section, you can find like a general guideline, but you can just enter the platform and start playing and building different kinds of hives and seeing what happens in between, because it's about having a dialogue with your partners, like trying to understand the concepts, how do they relate with each other, and how is that there is an interdependency, that you cannot think about achieving partnership for the goals if you don't think about the sustainable cities and communities, or about no poverty or zero hunger. So this is how you can play, and you can just feel free to play as you want. I will close now here. Oh, hello, Jordi. And now I will continue. Uh, so, well, this was like the short presentation of Hive Minds. We are really, really happy of being able to have already the webpage on the site. You can enter as you can find on the StreamYard, www.playhiveminds.com. And to finish this uh, presentation and this launch of this project, just wrapping some ideas that have been said. As you can see on this playground, we have tried through Hive Minds to build upon this shared public space that Friso mentioned about Europe. And because we think that each intervention changes, it has the potentiality to transform, and that everyone, no matter who he is, can act and can participate and can have a voice. And we are trying to do that through this game. To finish, yes, Prisa was talking about Europe, culture, and solidarity. Jordi told us about the sustainable development goals. We are thinking about this public space. I want to highlight two main things that have been told today, and there are like culture not being at the center of many of the agendas, and about the importance of thinking about culture being at the center because it is transversal, and also about the importance of having a local perspective, how it is very important to localize actions, but never forgetting that we are like we had this interdependency, and that we need to think globally to achieve goals and to achieve this more sustainable planet. So related to this, I think Freeze already has give some ideas, but it can be interesting if you can tell a bit more. Like, we are thinking about this shared public space, and you have been telling about this European sentiment, and I just want to ask you, like, why is that this European sentiment is so important, and how is that we can expand that borders of identity and think about this cross-contamination and interdependency. For example, how is that Europe is related with Latin America? How is that we can strengthen partnerships and work together for a planetarian uh, direction toward the sustainable world we live in?
You're clicking one button. Sorry, thank you for the question, and I think you answered part of the question already. If we are facing global crisis, it's not enough to be acting in your own little circle. And for many of us, that own little circle is defined by a nation state. So we're all defining ourselves as or a German or if it's a French person. And I think we all know deep inside that we are planetary citizens. In order to keep the planet livable for us humans, we need to do a lot of actions. Um, I think the step in between, and this is what the European Cultural Foundation is doing, is trying to not think about what the complete world needs to be doing, because we are not a United Nations, but we are thinking about what we can do at a European level. Because one might say many things, but the experiment of bringing together at this moment 27 nation states in one political, economical, and more a cultural project is one of the biggest achievements of the last century and of the current century. Now let's see how this project can also help create citizens that they're thinking on a European level. And if you're able to make the step from leaving one identity behind and stepping into a new identity, in the case that we are working on a European one, I think then it is very imaginable that you can also do so by stepping up one step more, let's say, to a planetary assessment of what you are as a citizen on this planet. And I was listening very carefully to Jordi, and I took the notes of this local climate crisis actions that I think are, of course, not only for local level. No, these are global exercises to be thinking about integrated approaches to landscape, creative explorations, and more integrated policies and programs. And I think for that latter, if we are looking at more integrated policies and programs, it is striking that we are more and more talking about Europe as also a, let's say, society of values. So I'm speaking about individual freedoms, about freedom of press, about the freedom to be opposing certain political regimes. And this is a model of Europe that many people in Europe are actually very happy with, and we could not do without. And we see how we react when things like this have been taken away from us. And I think to take it one step further, it's also what a lot of people in other countries, and forget about how many things in the world are wrong because of the legacy of Europe once being dominating globally with colonialism and imperialism, but the way how a certain set of European states are organized is perhaps an ideal that a lot of activists in other countries are striving to, know, a democratic system where it's one person, one vote, with individual freedoms. And only if we are all informed citizens can we make decisions that will help us to also perhaps tackle a climate crisis. Having said all this, then I get back to European Cultural Foundation. The world is really big, and already Europe is very big. And our modest contribution to this planetary consciousness starts in Europe, because that is what our founding fathers have decided to do so in 1954. If that is an answer to you.
Mhm. Excuse me. Thank you, Friso, for your answer. Yes, what I think it's clear is that we are all trying to work hard from micro or macro perspective channels and programs, and that, for instance, Hive Minds, it's a way to being able to collectively work and build hives, no matter who you are, where you come from, what is your background, but taking into account your experiences and the way you can create knowledge just by working together. I don't know, Jordi, if you want to say something about what just Friso just said in relationship with what you have presented and about relationship with Hive Minds?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I definitely think that it's very important to have an integrated perspective between the different levels, and definitely as he was referring, and as you were also summarizing from what we've seen until now, the importance of taking into account the global sphere and understand that there is a lot that needs to happen at the international level, including in regional contexts like that of the European Union and broader Europe, uh, in a number of different ways. Because of course there is a lot of advocacy and lobbying that needs to happen there in order, for instance, for cultural aspects to be integrated when major strategies and major agendas are adopted, but also in terms of exchanging experiences. And he was reflecting on the importance of some democratic procedures uh, being more present in communities around the world where they are not, but I would say also in countries where basic democratic conditions have existed for quite a long time, also to continue campaigning for the quality of democracy and to fight against any threats that we are seeing as well in terms of basic freedoms and so on. And at the same time that we have that global perspective in mind, there is also a lot of the explorations and the alliances and the partnerships, for instance, such as those that you were mentioning when testing Hive Minds, that can also happen at the local and the let's say smaller scale levels, including national levels, because it is there that often say building partnerships between cultural organizations, environmental organizations, social groups, educational institutions, and so on, can lead to more innovative ways of doing and, let's say, be adapted to context and so on. So it's an issue of having the right mindset where we can accommodate the local, the national, and the global, and at the same time, yeah, turning that into actions that also can take place at different levels. And to a certain extent, I think the nature of the challenges today is such that there is something to be done by everyone, regardless of the scale where you are, and somehow being aware of the potential for change you have, and trying to adapt it to your own circumstances.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you
No
very
worries.
much for your
Mhm.
reflection. Yes, indeed. And we think that through Hive Minds that it's possible because you can position yourself into a scenario where you can do, yeah, to think about these future-oriented solutions, but in a playful way where you can have a voice no matter who you are, and you can propose different kind of actions. So how that's how being a person or a collective or a small organization or a great institution, we can all have the potential to be transformative. And I do think that that's what we were trying to show you here. Just, I don't know, to end, if Friso or Jordi has any other thought about, yes, under the world we live in, under circumstances we have to face, why is that we should all keep trying to enhance this idea of culture as the fourth pillar of sustainable development? And if you want to share just like an idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a lot of that we've shared so far about the importance of, say, imagining better features through our creativity, taking into account and recognizing the value that exists in a lot of knowledge that has been either learned from the past or which is continuously created individually and collectively in many communities around the world, and that a lot of that as some of what makes it necessary for our views on sustainability to integrate a cultural component. And I think somehow a tool like Hive Minds is a way to encapsulate that and make it accessible. And so we invite, I think one of the main ideas today is just to invite everyone to use that in their own contexts, in their schools, neighborhood groups, cultural organizations, and so on, and so see how these can lead to imagining differently about our future.
That's it. Thank you, Jordi.
you.
And Friso, before finishing, do you want to share something else?
Well, I think it is a fantastic tool, but I'm going to repeat what Jordi has been saying too. And then I'm referring to one of Jordi's remarks too, which is about building more integrated policies and programs, which of course is something that we as a foundation sometimes need doing too. And I think with Hive Minds as a tool, it can also be a great tool for organizations that feel that they could be stepping up in their work, and that this is a way actually to get stuff involved in co-creating, because I think that is very important with the idea of Hive Minds in co-creating towards what you can be doing, and whether that is indeed with a community center, with activist groups, with your school, or with your employer. I think Hive Minds is a very important tool for this, and then I think the addition that you can do it online and perhaps align with other people is great. And I think then, Lina, with your question on, is there anything more to say about current political circumstances? I don't think so, but I was reading a quote by Václav Havel today, who of course once said, "Hope is not a conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing no matter how it turns out." And I think this is a bottom line for a lot of the work that we do. And I think that that bottom line, if you want to concretize this, you can start by playing Hive Minds to see what you can actually concretely do. So that will be my last comment, I think.
Thank you very much, Friso, for your intervention, your reflection, your support in all this process. Thank you, Jordi, also for all the ideas you have shared with us. We will finish this presentation, but again, we just want you all to feel free to visit the web platform of HiveMinds, to come to Planta Uno. You are all welcome to the playground of Hive Minds. If you are a cultural mediator, an artist, an educator, if you are a community leader, if you are a person or a collective or organization who wants to position in relation to the sustainable development goals, please use this playful methodology, enjoy it, use it as you want, and if you learn things that are not a state, please share them with us. If you want to be a Hive Mind ambassador, please write us an email, and we will see how to continue co-creating and producing knowledge together to live better and in a more sustainable world. So thank you very much, and see you soon.